I never believed in heaven because I never liked stories that sounded too clean. My name is Arthur Collins. I was 73 years old, a retired courthouse clerk from a small town in Vermont, and for most of my life, I believed death was nothing more than a door closing in an empty room. No music, no angels, no golden stairs, just the end. I used to say that with confidence, sometimes too much confidence. My wife, Margaret, believed differently. Every Sunday morning, she sat in the same church pew, third row from the front, hands folded over her purse, singing softly, even when her voice began to shake with age. I never mocked her, but I never joined her either. I would sit at home instead, reading the newspaper, drinking black coffee, pretending I was smarter because I needed proof for everything. Margaret died 5 years before me. Cancer took her slowly. After she was gone, the house became too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet, the kind of quiet that waits for you in every room. By 73, I had built a routine out of loneliness. Wake up at 6:10, feed the old orange cat, boil 1 egg, toast 1 slice of bread, check the mailbox even when I knew nothing would be there, then sit by the window and watch other people live their lives. That morning was different only because I found Margaret's old church gloves in the hall closet. White gloves, soft, folded neatly inside a small cardboard box. I don't know why I opened that closet. Maybe old men do strange things when they feel time getting close. I stood there holding those gloves, and suddenly I remembered her hands. Warm hands, patient hands. Hands that forgave me more times than I deserved. For the first time in years, I decided to go to church. Not because I believed, because I missed her. The sky was pale blue that morning. Cold sunlight came through bare winter trees. The town looked frozen and gentle, like an old photograph. I wore my gray coat, the one Margaret always said made me look like a serious man pretending not to be soft. I almost smiled when I remembered that. Inside the church, everything smelled the same. Old wood, candle wax, dust, perfume from women who had been coming there longer than I had been alive. I sat in Margaret's pew, third row, front left. Nobody bothered me. Maybe they knew grief when they saw it. The service had already started. The pastor was speaking, but I barely listened. My eyes stayed on the stained glass window above the altar. Blue, gold, red. Morning light passed through it and fell across the floor in broken colors. I remember thinking Margaret would have liked that. Then something strange happened. Not pain, not fear. A soft pressure came over me, like someone placing a warm hand on the center of my chest. I looked down. My fingers were trembling. The hymn began. People around me stood up slowly. I tried to stand too, but my legs did not answer. The church moved slightly sideways, voices stretched. The colored light on the floor became brighter, too bright. A woman beside me whispered, "Sir, are you all right?" I wanted to say yes. That was my habit. Always yes, always fine, always nothing wrong. But my mouth would not move. The last thing I saw clearly was Margaret's empty place beside me, and then I heard her voice. Not loud, not from the room, from somewhere inside the silence. "Arthur, stop fighting." Then everything disappeared. When I became aware again, I was not in the church. I was standing in my old kitchen, but not the kitchen as it was now. This was the kitchen from 1979. Yellow curtains, green tiles, a small radio near the sink, the smell of cinnamon toast. I knew it was impossible, but every detail was real, too real. I heard laughter from the next room, young laughter, Margaret's laughter. My chest tightened, but there was no pain now, only a deep confusion. I walked toward the sound. There she was, not old, not sick, not dying. Margaret stood near the dining table wearing a blue dress I had forgotten until that moment. Her hair was dark. Her face was young. She was setting plates down while smiling at someone behind me. I turned and saw myself, young Arthur, 30 years old, standing by the back door with a briefcase in hand, irritated, impatient, already late for work. Then I remembered this day. It came back with terrible sharpness. It was our anniversary. Margaret had made breakfast. I had forgotten. Not completely forgotten. Worse than that. I remembered, but I chose work anyway. Young Margaret said softly, "Can you stay just 20 minutes?" Young me looked at the clock. "I can't. The judge needs those files." She nodded, still smiling. But now, as an old dead man watching the memory, I saw what I had missed. Her smile broke after I turned away, just a little, small enough for a selfish man not to notice, big enough to wound a loving woman. I wanted to shout at my younger self, "Stay, put the briefcase down, hold her. 20 minutes will not destroy your life." But memory does not listen. Young Arthur left through the back door. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen. The radio kept playing. The toast went cold. And I finally understood something death had brought me to see. I had not been cruel in one big way. I had been careless in 1,000 small ways. That was worse. The kitchen began to darken around the edges. Margaret's young face faded. The walls stretched away like smoke. I reached for her. "Wait!" But she was gone. Then I heard church bells. Slow, deep. One bell, then another. Suddenly I was standing in a long hallway made of soft gray light. There were doors on both sides, some open, some closed. Behind one door I heard my mother humming. Behind another I heard a child crying. At the far end of the hallway someone was sitting on a wooden bench. I could not see their face, only their hands. White gloves folded neatly in their lap. The hallway felt endless. Not frightening at first, just unfamiliar in a way that made my chest feel hollow. Soft gray light surrounded everything. No walls, no ceiling. Only rows of doors stretching farther than my eyes could follow. And silence. Not empty silence, living silence. The kind that listens back. I stood there staring at the person on the wooden bench. Still couldn't see their face clearly. Only the white gloves resting neatly in their lap. Margaret's gloves. My legs moved before I consciously decided to walk. Slow steps. Careful steps. The floor beneath me looked like polished stone, yet made no sound when I touched it. As I got closer, I noticed something strange about the doors. Every single one carried a different sound behind it. Laughter, rain, arguments, music. Some sounds were soft, others unbearable. One door held the sound of someone crying so deeply it made my stomach twist. Another held children laughing in summer sprinklers. The hallway felt less like a place and more like memory itself. The figure on the bench finally spoke before I reached them. "You always rushed through your life." Margaret's voice, calm, warm, exactly as I remembered. My throat tightened instantly. "I know," I whispered. The figure slowly looked up, and there she was. Not young this time, not old either, something in between, healthy, peaceful. Her eyes looked clearer than any eyes I had ever seen on earth. For several seconds I could not speak. All the grief I buried after her death suddenly opened inside me like broken glass. "You're dead too?" I finally asked. Margaret smiled sadly. "No, Arthur, you're the one between places." Those words frightened me more than darkness ever could, because suddenly I realized something. This was real, not a dream, not hallucination. Real. I sat beside her on the bench slowly. For a while, neither of us spoke. The hallway stretched endlessly before us, while distant sounds echoed softly behind doors. Finally, I asked the question that had followed me my entire life. "Is this heaven?" Margaret looked down at her gloves thoughtfully before answering. "No, This is where you finally become honest." The sentence settled heavily inside me. Then she stood. "Come with me." We began walking through the hallway together, and for the first time in years, I did not feel old. Not physically. The ache in my knees was gone. My breathing felt light, easy, but emotionally, I felt exposed, like every hidden part of me could suddenly be seen. Margaret stopped at a dark blue door halfway down the corridor. Behind it, I heard rain hitting windows. My stomach tightened immediately, because somehow I already knew what waited inside. Margaret touched the handle gently. "You spent your whole life believing love was understood without being spoken," she said softly. Then she opened the door. I stood inside our bedroom from 32 years earlier. Nighttime, rain outside, a lamp glowing beside the bed. I remembered this night instantly, one of the worst nights of our marriage. Young Margaret sat at the edge of the bed crying quietly, and younger me stood near the dresser, angrily removing his tie. "You think I wanted this life?" younger Arthur snapped. "You think I enjoy carrying everything alone?" Margaret wiped her eyes immediately. "I never asked you to carry everything alone. You didn't have to." The memory hit me like a physical wound because now I could hear what younger Arthur could not: fear. Margaret wasn't angry that night. She was lonely, terribly lonely. But back then, I was too proud to notice. I had grown up believing men solve problems by staying silent, work harder, complain less, feel less. That was the version of manhood handed to my generation, and it poisoned more marriages than alcohol ever did. Younger Margaret whispered something I had completely forgotten. "I miss you even when you're sitting beside me." The room became unbearably still, because hearing it now, after death, felt different. I watched younger me look away instead of answering her. That tiny moment broke something inside me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was ordinary. That's the terrible thing about marriage sometimes. It rarely collapses from one giant tragedy. Usually it erodes quietly. Small silences, missed tenderness, unspoken fears. Days becoming years before either person notices the distance. "I loved her," I whispered desperately beside present-day Margaret. "I know," she answered softly. "Then why does this hurt so much?" She looked at me with tears forming in her eyes. "Because now you can finally see all the moments love needed more from you." The bedroom around us slowly faded. Rain disappeared. The lamp dimmed into darkness. And suddenly we stood in another memory. This time outside a hospital room. I froze immediately. No, not this one. Margaret had cancer then, stage 4. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. I watched myself sitting beside her hospital bed, reading paperwork instead of looking at her, trying not to cry, trying not to break. Margaret squeezed my younger hand weakly. "You don't have to pretend with me anymore," she whispered. But younger Arthur only nodded silently, still hiding, still protecting himself with distance even while losing the person he loved most. Present-day Margaret stood beside me quietly. "You thought strength meant silence," she said. My eyes filled instantly, because she was right. I had spent my entire life confusing emotional absence with strength. Then suddenly, everything around us trembled violently. The hospital hallway flickered. The grey corridor beyond the memories darkened. And for the first time since arriving there, I heard something terrifying. A scream. Not human exactly. Deep, broken, full of grief. The sound echoed through every door at once. Margaret's expression changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. "What was that?" I whispered. She looked down the endless hallway and very softly said, "Not everyone lets go peacefully." At the far end of the corridor, a door slowly opened by itself, and darkness spilled out from inside it like smoke. The darkness coming from the open door did not move naturally. It spread too slowly, like ink bleeding through water. The hallway itself seemed to recoil from it. Every sound behind the other doors stopped completely. No laughter, no music, no voices, only silence. Margaret grabbed my hand suddenly. That alone terrified me, because during her illness, during all those hospital nights, she had always been the calm one. But now her fingers trembled. "We need to go," she whispered. I stared toward the far end of the corridor. Something was standing inside the darkness. At first I thought it was a man. Then I realized it kept changing shape slightly. Tall, then thin, then bent, like memory refusing to stay stable. "Arthur," Margaret said more firmly this time, but I couldn't stop staring, because deep down, I recognized the feeling coming from that thing. Not evil, regret, pure regret, heavy enough to poison the air itself. The figure began walking slowly toward us, and with every step, the hallway lights dimmed further. I suddenly heard whispers around me, hundreds of them, tiny broken sentences echoing from the doors. I should have stayed. I didn't mean it. Please forgive me. Old pain, old guilt, every unfinished thing human beings carry through life. Margaret pulled me backward, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The figure stopped halfway down the corridor, still too dark to see clearly. Then it spoke, and the voice nearly stopped my heart, because it was my voice. "You wasted so much time." The hallway shook violently. Door handles rattled everywhere. One door flew open briefly beside me. Inside, I saw myself at 42 years old, sitting in the garage pretending to fix tools, while secretly crying after my son moved across the country. Another door opened. I saw Margaret eating dinner alone while I worked late for the third weekend in a row. Another. Me ignoring a phone call from my younger brother 2 months before he died. Memory after memory flashed open around me like wounds. I covered my face. "Stop," but the figure kept moving closer. "You thought there would always be more time," it whispered in my own voice. The worst part? It wasn't accusing me unfairly. It was telling the truth. Human beings survive by pretending life is endless. We delay apologies, delay tenderness, delay honesty. We think love can wait until next week, next year, retirement. Then suddenly, there is no next anything. The figure finally stepped close enough for me to see its face, and I nearly collapsed. It was me, not physically, spiritually, the version of myself built from every buried regret I refused to face while alive. Its eyes looked exhausted, ancient, empty. "I don't understand," I whispered. Margaret stepped beside me carefully. "This place doesn't punish people," she said softly. "It reveals them." The other Arthur stared directly into my eyes, then suddenly reached out and touched my chest. Instantly the hallway vanished. I stood inside our living room during Christmas of 1994. Warm lights glowed from the tree, snow outside the windows, music playing softly. My children were young again, Emily laughing on the carpet, Michael opening presents, Margaret smiling beside the fireplace. The scene looked beautiful, perfect almost. But now I noticed something I had missed completely while living it. I wasn't truly there, not emotionally. Young Arthur sat in the armchair, distracted by work paperwork resting on his lap, barely speaking, barely looking up. Present physically, absent spiritually. And suddenly I understood something horrifying. You can love your family deeply and still fail to make them feel loved. That realization shattered me more than death itself. I watched young Emily glance toward me repeatedly during the memory, wanting attention, wanting connection, wanting one full moment with her father. But younger me kept saying the same sentence over and over. "Just a minute." God, how many lives are damaged by those 3 words? Just a minute. Later. tomorrow, after work, after stress, after life calms down. And one day life simply ends before later arrives. The Christmas scene dissolved slowly around me. The warm lights faded first, then the voices, then Margaret's smile, until only darkness remained again. I found myself back in the grey hallway, breathing heavily, or at least trying to breathe. The darker version of me stood silently nearby now, less frightening than before, almost sad. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. Neither version of Margaret answered immediately. Then, finally, the real Margaret touched my face gently and smiled with tears in her eyes. "That depends," she whispered, "on whether you're finally ready to let go." Before I could answer, a loud sound exploded somewhere far away. A machine, beeping rapidly. Then voices, real voices, doctors shouting, and suddenly the hallway began cracking apart. Thin fractures of bright white light spread across the floor beneath us, reality pulling again. The darker version of myself slowly stepped backward into shadow. But before disappearing completely, he said one final thing. "Love was never the thing you lacked, Arthur." Then he looked directly into my eyes. Presence was. The floor beneath me shattered violently. The hallway collapsed. Doors vanished. Margaret reached toward me desperately as the light consumed everything around us. And the final thing I heard before falling into brightness was her voice saying, "Arthur, wake up." I woke up to sunlight piercing through the blinds of my bedroom. It felt impossibly bright after what I had just experienced. The hospital noises I remembered, machines, beeping, hurried footsteps, were gone. I was back in my old house in Vermont. The smell of wet leaves and pine came through the open window. Cold air brushed my face. My heart was still beating, painfully alive. Margaret was there, sitting in her chair by the window, older now, wrinkles softly etched on her face, eyes cautious but warm. She had been crying. I reached for her hand, and for the first time in decades, held her without fear. "Arthur, you're back," she whispered, voice trembling. I couldn't speak at first. Tears fell unbidden. Every regret, every missed moment, every silence I had ever allowed between us pressed into my chest. "I'm sorry," I finally said, voice breaking, "for everything." She nodded, not fully understanding, but her grip tightened. We didn't need words, just being there, together, alive in the same room, healed more than any confession could. For weeks afterward, I reflected on that journey, on the grey hallway, on the doors holding memories, on the version of myself built from regret. I realized the truth. Heaven was not a place of golden light or angels. It was clarity. It was seeing your life as it truly was, and being forced to feel it all. The love you gave, the love you withheld, the moments you missed. I began to live differently, not recklessly, not dramatically, but with attention to the small things. Quiet dinners, morning coffee shared with Margaret, phone calls answered immediately, hugs not delayed. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind rustled the trees and the house was silent, I remembered the hallway and the doors. I could almost hear faint whispers of the other Arthur, the regrets, the memories replaying endlessly. And I understood finally. What mattered most wasn't avoiding death. It was living fully before it came. At 73, I had seen what lay beyond. And now, alive, I finally understood heaven. Not as a reward, but as a mirror. Life itself. Quiet, fleeting, fragile, and profoundly, painfully beautiful.